My name's Bob Safian. I'm the host of a Rapid Response, which is, as Jeff said, based on covering real-time leadership in moments of change. We're going to do a live Rapid Response session here today, and we're going to talk about managing in an environment of crisis and uncertainty and division. And it's serious. We're going to be talking today about Israel and Gaza. This is a difficult and challenging topic. We realize that there will be references in the conversation to violence and to hate and to other difficult issues. We ask you to be respectful of what you hear, that you try to keep your eyes, your ears, your minds open. And please do try to, be respectful of the opinions that you hear voiced by everybody up here, because it is a challenging topic. And in the process, we hope that you can look for and find and see ways of dealing with really fast-moving, challenging situations in a way that might apply to your world, because we all have challenges that we are addressing with our teams and in our world. So with your cooperation, some deep breaths as we delve into this topic. I'm going to have two guests up here. The first is the CEO of World Central Kitchen, Erin Gore. You saw World Central Kitchen is a winner of this year's Master Scale Rapid Response Award. World Central Kitchen is an extraordinary organization. They've been feeding millions of people all around the globe, from hurricane victims to Ukraine and to Israel and Gaza as well. So if you will join me, and please welcome Erin Gore. All right. All right. So, Erin, we're going to jump right in.
Let's do it.
You ready?
Ready.
Okay. So, World Central Kitchen works in incredibly difficult situations all over the world. Thousands of people have been tragically killed in Gaza and Israel and Lebanon over the past year. I want to begin by asking you about what you've called the worst day of your life, last April 1st, when 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers were killed by an IDF strike in Gaza. You and your team first heard about this on social media when people were posting images of bloody bodies and of your colleagues with passports identifying them. I mean, I can only imagine that
and
trauma.
Friends, yeah.
So how do you react in that situation as a leader? How do you think about leading your team? Like, what do you do? And then I guess from there, sort of how does it impact World Central Kitchen's relief efforts going forward from there?
Yeah, a lot to unpack, and I think I'm still honestly processing some of it to this day. Our work in Gaza, our work in Israel, our work in Lebanon, it's so profound. We have learned so much about who we are, how we show up, how we have impact over the almost 15 years that we have been in existence as a nonprofit. Our purpose is to feed people after disasters, after crises. What I've heard from the team in Israel, especially in Gaza and now in Lebanon, is that our work has never been more dire, more profound, more life-saving than what we are doing, what we are accomplishing in Gaza. Our team, the 7 colleagues and friends that we lost, on top of the 500 Palestinians that still carry out this work in Gaza for us every single day, they were there because we had served over 75 million meals. We were a driving force in breaking through barriers to really complicated, really challenging scenarios where food is absolutely a lifeline.
I mean, I could see in a situation like that also sort of saying, like, well, maybe we should pull back a little bit because we're in danger in a way that maybe we didn't expect we were necessarily going to be in danger. And yet, instead, you've sort of doubled down, added new kitchens named after some of your colleagues.
Yeah. Look, we had really, really hard conversations. I mean, you're showing my colleagues right now, it's Saif, it's Sami, Damien, Jacob, John, Jim, and James. You know, a lot of the work that we do carrying forward is in their honor, to honor their legacy. I speak their names often because they're not here physically, but I can keep them alive. We can keep their memories alive by saying their names. And that is a promise that we have made, that I have made to their families, to the organization, that they would want. And so, you know, in moments of crisis or disasters, and like that's what we do, right? Of all the people that are used to operating in disasters and crises, it's the World Central Kitchen. But to lead in that moment, there's, as you said, how we found out social media, and that's common in Gaza. There aren't a lot of news outlets. There's not a lot of international press. There's, again, so many Palestinian heroes that are doing their best, risking their lives to share so many different stories every single day. And so for us to find out on social media, everybody has a crisis plan. You have your A, you call this person, you call that person. All of that just implodes. It explodes, right? And so for us, it was just leading through making decisions with incomplete information, which is oftentimes what happens during crises, during disasters, is it's piecemeal, but you have to make immediate decisions, immediate actions.
And you have to sort of set your own emotions aside?
Try to, yeah, try to. In this case, I was able to do that because my first priority was the families of our victims, of our colleagues, of our friends, right? Everything, my purpose became, you know, to find information, to give them answers. Obviously, World Central Kitchen, we want and need more answers than we have today. And we continue to ask those questions. We continue our investigation, which we're not so open about, we're not public about, but that does continue. But yeah, it's really challenging. And I think we're all here because we do challenging things. And, you know, there's lots of pride and accomplishment that drives us forward. But sometimes there's lots of pain as well. But, you know, through these moments, it's very iterative. You learn more information or you make a decision and then, oh, it wasn't the right decision. So you have to very quickly pivot. So you just have to be very comfortable in that space. Even when so much is weighing on you, when the world is looking at you, when other NGOs are calling and saying, okay, this is the moment, World Central Kitchen is in the limelight. You guys can change the trajectory here. You guys can change Israel's decisions. And I mean, as much as I would love to have and wield that power, it's simply not true. And so there is a lot weighing, you know, in these crisis scenarios. But, you know, we did pause the activation, right? You mentioned that we stopped and then we carried forward. We did pause the activation because there for a while, I wasn't sure if this paella pan, that is our beloved logo, if this paella pan was effectively a bullseye, right? The vehicles that our teammates, that our colleagues and friends are traveling in were marked vehicles. They were mostly armored vehicles. And the drones, you know, hit right through our logos. And so safety, security first in a context where there are no guarantees, but in a place where international humanitarian law should carry some weight, right? And so it did take us a while. I did pause our activation for about a month, had really hard conversations with colleagues, had really hard conversations. And when I say colleagues, I mean the 500 Palestinians who are working with us still to this day. Essentially and effectively what it came down to was them, their heart, their passion, and we as World Central Kitchen needing and always leading with community and listening to the community. The situation, again, it's a lifeline. There's so many dangers. I have so many messages in my WhatsApp, of saying, you know, we might die today. There's so many that have just kind of accepted their own mortality, right? That any day, any moment could be their time. And that their time might come from a gun, a missile, or starvation. And them saying, I don't want to die from starvation. And we can do something about that. So how can we not show up?
I'm going to thank you for sharing all of that. I'm going to bring out our second guest to join us, another Master Scale Awards honoree, our Global Impact Award winner. He spent decades working to try to bring Israeli and Palestinian businesses together to build bridges through the OneVoice Movement. He's also the founder of Kind Snacks. So please welcome Daniel Lubetzky. Well, Daniel, thanks for joining us. You were a guest on my Rapid Response podcast a year ago, just after Hamas, the October 7th attacks and hostage taking, and you talked about needing to support builders over destroyers. Since then, we've seen a lot more destruction than we've seen building. I mean, Gaza's leveled, thousands of Palestinians perishing, violence spreading to Lebanon. How has the last year impacted your perspective? Are you still focused on building?
Yeah, the last year is one of the hardest years of my life. I mean, pales in comparison to what my father went through. He was a Holocaust survivor, so I want to also be a little bit respectful of other people's suffering, which is much greater. But just to give people some background, because you might not know this about me, and then I can answer your question. I was born in Mexico, but came to the United States when I was 16. My first company after law school is Peaceworks, which for 25 years brought Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, Egyptians, and Turks to use business as a force for breaking stereotypes, cementing relationships, and building ventures that lasted for a quarter century. And then, together with a Palestinian-Israeli co-founder, Mohammad Daralche, we launched the OneVoice Movement, which became the largest grassroots movement in both Israel and Palestine to try to empower citizens to seize back the agenda for conflict resolution and seize it back away from forces of violent absolutism on all sides. And so during the Hamas massacre of October 7th, a lot of our Palestinian and Israeli staff and family members died, including Mohammad Daralche, my co-founder's cousin, who was a Muslim nurse trying to tend to victims of the massacre and who was killed by the Hamas terrorists. And following Israel's response to Hamas, we had also a number of our Palestinian staff members die. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to have Israeli, Jewish, Israeli, Muslim, and Palestinian members be killed by this conflict. And what breaks my heart even more is what I've noticed, when I started Peaceworks and OneVoice, I always thought that my role was going to be to build bridges in the Middle East and to prevent what happened to my father from happening again to others in the Middle East by bringing peace to that region. I now worry globally that instead of us exporting that, we're importing across the world more tribalization, more hate. All of us here in the United States are experiencing more division, certainly than since I immigrated to the United States. And it's a global problem of builders versus destroyers. And there's many, many forces contributing to toxic polarization that are actually winning right now. If you look at the last year, every one of us around the audience, myself, all of us, are being impacted by that. And every one of us recognizes that there's a problem on the other side. But we don't recognize it happening to us and to our groups. And it's very, very serious because whether it's in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict where pro-Israel people have one set of information that they're getting and pro-Palestine people have another one, or in the context of the blue-red divide here, our social media feeds are telling us what we want to hear rather than what we need to hear. And each side only sees the worst of the other side. They don't understand the pain of the other side. We're just losing empathy. We're losing an appreciation for a little bit more nuance and context. And it's going to be harder for us as builders to overcome these divisions if we allow that. So I think it starts with everyone that's listening today and everyone in their daily lives understanding that this is happening to us, that where there's rigid ideologies or foreign adversaries funding groups to try to divide us, or political forces using scandal and division to raise funds and stay in power rather than to solve problems, or social media algorithms feeding us this hate, or all these toxic forces, polarization. We need to try to overcome that by building alliances with those that are different from us. However difficult it is, it's doubly important. Searching within ourselves for the 4 C's of curiosity, compassion, creativity, and courage that make a builder's mindset, and then affirmatively doing something about it. And it's just going to take a ton of work.
I want to ask, you mentioned that you're Jewish. I'm Jewish also. You have not been a supporter necessarily of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He said he considers you an enemy. He's called you a traitor to the Jewish people. I'm curious how you parse your feelings about Israel versus your feelings about the Israeli government.
The easy part for, I assume in the audience, for people to like me is to say, yes, I recognize that Prime Minister Netanyahu was not in the best interests of the Israeli people, of the Jewish people, of the world over 10, 12 years ago. And the reason he called me that is because I supported who's now President Herzog when he sought to unseat Prime Minister Netanyahu over 10 years ago. I don't think he's a good person, but just like the context of Trump, just because it's Netanyahu or Trump that has a policy, doesn't necessarily make everything they're doing monstrous. And so I'm going to challenge you and myself by just saying that the conflict today, the extremists are winning because they're manipulating us. And so
extremists on both sides.
On both sides. And so prior to October 7th, the Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich government is the most far right-wing government that's existed in Israel's history. And there's a lot of factors why Netanyahu allied himself with them, which are not good reasons related to his investigation. So I think that government is definitely a problem. But today, for people like I to be able to come and be builders and build jobs and build opportunities and bridges, I recognize that will never be possible so long as Hamas stays in power in Gaza. So I'm a peacemaker, I'm not a pacifist. For me to do my job, and for my Palestinian partners to do their job, and my Israeli partners to do, I'm a confused Mexican Jew, by the way, so I'm like, I mean this with, but I've been to Gaza multiple times, I've been to the West Bank countless times, to Israel countless times. I very much believe in the right of Israel and the homeland to the Jewish people to live in peace with its Palestinian partners as the homeland of the Palestinian people. And, you know, I will answer your question in 1 second, but I want to say, anybody that plays into violent absolutists on either side is actually condemning their own people, because over the last year, we've been seeing people supporting Hamas and supporting the extremists on either side. You're not helping your own people, because if you have an absolutist vision that wants Palestine to raise Israel, the Israelis are never going to hand the keys. It's just going to create a perpetual conflict. And the people that are living with the consequences in Palestine and Israel understand that, and they want to find a historic compromise. But it just gets harder and harder. But going back to Netanyahu, I don't think he's a good person, but I wouldn't, just because he supports a particular policy, think that necessarily I oppose that policy. And I, as painful as it is, because I see everyday images. Today, I saw images of 7,000 Palestinians leaving the Jabalia refugee camp, and it's heart-wrenching to see the kids having to leave. And I see that content because my Palestinian partners make sure that I see it, and my Israeli partners make sure that I see their content. But until we remove Hamas from power, my Palestinian partners tell me this, it's not going to be possible for us to start bringing in investments, bringing jobs, and starting to rebuild a better future. Just like we need to remove the Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich government from power through elections, because in Israel there will be hopefully democratic elections in the next 18 months. And once you have those conditions, we need to double down. But until then, we need to start preparing with a builder's blueprint for how we're going to take this horrible crisis and turn it into the need for us to advance this.
I want to ask you something, Erin. I was recently at an event with you, the World Central Kitchen, that you had with founder Jose Andres, and I got to meet a bunch of your colleagues who have been serving people in the Middle East and elsewhere. And I could see that for them, it sort of can be hard for them to maintain neutrality. they have a lot of strong feelings about the environment that they're in. But I also know that as an aid organization, you kind of have to be neutral to be able to get access to these areas where you're working. And I'm just curious how you balance this neutrality with sort of addressing these strong emotions from your teams. A lot of folks out here have teams that have strong emotions on all sides of this issue. I know you've had 2 people quit because they wanted World Central Kitchen to take stronger positions. Like, how do you think about balancing those things?
I mean, from a corporate mission standpoint, it's simple. It's so simple. We show up, we feed people, no questions asked. Have you been affected by a disaster crisis? Here's a warm meal. From the people standpoint, it has been challenging. It really has. And I think that really speaks to the divisiveness that you were mentioning earlier. I mean, there's a simplicity to what we do, right? Non-political. We actually started feeding in Israel first, shortly after October 7th, I think on October 8th, actually. And then as soon as we could get into Gaza, because it's very complex and complicated getting in there, then we start feeding in Gaza, and now we're in Lebanon. And so, we walk the walk, we talk the talk. I, as a leader, always have to be very purposeful and driven, grounded and rooted. But the minute we start to take a side, either way, is the minute that we don't have the freedom and the liberty to feed around the world, right? And I would never jeopardize that. And I think that it really speaks to.
I mean, has the business community global community been like sort of helpful or not in helping you deal with the situation, in protecting people in harm's way? Like, do you feel like the partnerships are in the right places?
I love that question, actually. In their hearts, yes. Not always in their actions, right? And I think that there's so much trepidation from business leaders in particular to come forth outright and support. I mean, we're a nonprofit, so we take financial donations, right? We haven't raised as much as we have in the Ukraine, when the Ukraine war escalated, right? And so I think that there's a lot of fear to take a side, or that helping, which I don't really understand. We're helping humanity. We're feeding people, right? It's not taking a side. You're picking people. But the world isn't so.
You've had some
simple.
frustration about.
I want to just share. I want to go deeper to what you were talking about. I really want to make sure that all of us understand how serious these issues are, not just in the very serious context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but in everything that we're experiencing nowadays. Because I believe if you were to track how open-minded society and all of us were 10 years ago versus right now, every one of us is less so today because of all these forces that I said. And so we need to exercise the muscle of a builder's mindset. And when I say curiosity, I mean, what we all need to do is, as painful as it is, read sources that we're uncomfortable reading. As painful as it is, click on links of commentary from the opposite side of where we come from, so we better understand the other side. Because these algorithms are just going to tell you what you want to hear and affirm rather than inform your beliefs, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. I even see it in my own algorithms. I used to get more balanced Israeli-Palestinian stuff, but as a Jewish person, it's hard for me to click on that painful stuff about Palestinian suffering. So now my feeds are much more just the Israeli narrative, and it just takes a lot of work to do the painful work to understand what's going on other sides. Like, almost always when I get information from 99% of people, I know what they're going to tell me. They're not trying to challenge themselves. Don't just share to reaffirm what your friends believe, what you believe. It's so much easier for all of us. Try to understand the other side, because whether we're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the election here, I mean,
Erin was actually backstage showing me some photos of her recent trip to Florida during the hurricane, and you showed me a gumball machine, which is not something. Yes, it's a gumball machine with ammunition in it, which is, just another part of the world to reflect on. There's actually there's someone here in the audience who I want to bring into this conversation if I can. He's a Palestinian business leader. He was forced to flee his home in Gaza in 2014. I think I have that right. He works here in the U.S. now. He actually works with Daniel at the OneVoice Movement. His name is Ez Masri. Ez, thank you for joining us here. Back at your family's home in Gaza, you experienced a lot of hardship. Hamas you had guns in your backyard, your home was ransacked and eventually destroyed. You still have family and friends there. So what are things that you think the business community, that this group here should understand about what's happening on the ground in Gaza? What do we misunderstand? What do we need to hear?
First, I would like to extend my deep condolences to the World Central Kitchen, and thank you for feeding my family and the Palestinian people in Gaza. Thank you very much. What I wanted to say, in the population of Gaza is 2.3 million, and the conflict with Israel is between the extremists in Gaza and the extremists in Israel, and the majority of the Palestinians in Gaza want to live and raise their kids and to have economic prosperity. We are people who want to live in peace next to Israel, hopefully in a two-state solution.
Yeah, are you more or less optimistic that that's going to happen?
There is no solution to Israel-Palestine conflict but the two-state solution. We have two proud people that each needs a state, a Palestinian state and Israel. Yes.
You have an opportunity here to ask a question of Daniel, who you work with, or Erin. Do you have a question you want to ask?
Yeah, I asked Daniel, and I said something to Daniel that since I met you 18 years ago in Gaza, we have been building bridges between Israelis and Palestinians. Unfortunately, wars break bridges, burn bridges. And my question to you, are we back at square one, and what we're going to do in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. So, Daniel, what do you do? Are you back to the beginning? You got to start over?
Listen, I agree with Ezeldin that there's no alternative. And very often times where you're doing this work, you ask yourself why the hell you're doing it, because it's so difficult. And I think that the answer is because there's no alternative, because otherwise we're going to condemn future generations to this. So, like Ezeldin said, during times of war, everybody becomes more radicalized. I've been in this space for 30 plus years. I have not come up with a solution because I'm not a warrior, right? I'm a bridge builder, and I'm not in those situations. I don't know how to build bridges when you're trying to stop the war and to stop the extremists. What I do know, and I have absolute conviction about it, is that the pent-up hate will provide us a small window of opportunity when this thing ends, which I, God willing, think will be within the next 6 to 24 months. We will have an opportunity of a lifetime, because the people have experienced so much pain. They understand that there's no alternative, like Ezeldin said, but to ultimately recognize the right of both proud peoples to a future, not because they love each other, but because they understand that for them to fulfill their potential, they need to allow both sides to fulfill the potential. There is no settlement of the conflict without fulfilling the national aspirations of both peoples for a better future and respecting each other. And so we need to start preparing for that. And the way we need to prepare internally, personally, is not allowing the absolutists from hijacking our minds and supporting any absolutist agendas. It's much harder than it seems. Remembering to keep context of the need to recognize the humanity of both sides, which is extraordinarily hard, and then starting to prepare a blueprint where business people start organizing, when governments start thinking, how are we going to do a Marshall Plan where we are going to empower the builders in Gaza, across the West Bank also, in Lebanon, in Israel, and strengthen the builders in order for the dividers to not hijack our lives.
Erin, can I share? I'm so antsy. Can I share a community kind of perspective? So World Central, sorry to cut you off.
Go ahead.
One of the beauties of World Central Kitchen and how we do our work is by people, community members. We have North Star statement. We go so far as to say community is our superpower. We hire locally. We try to purchase as much food locally as possible. So we come in contact with people from all walks of life that are literally just like us, trying to live their life every single day. Not political, just like World Central Kitchen too. And so I don't think we're starting from square one when it comes to the community, when it comes to people, their heart, their passion. I think I know that there are Israelis that would go into Gaza and join World Central Kitchen and feed Palestinians. I know that there are Palestinians that would go into Israel if they had that magic paper, that magic passport, right? That would allow them to. So I don't think all hope is lost by any means. I think people realize when politicians, when the world has gone too far, when that line has been crossed. And suffice it to say that a lot of people on both sides are very much at that point right now in Israel, in Gaza, and in Lebanon because they see what's coming, right? And so this isn't going to be solved with war, with bombs, with death. It's not.
I mean, when Daniel was struggling to decide how long the conflict is going to last, he would say 6 to 24 months. And I could see you sort of be a little bit like, whoa.
And I was wondering if it was because you think that's not realistic or because it's so painful every more
It's
day.
painful.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder, and I know we don't have too much more time.
But just practically, this is very important to understand. What we don't want to have happen is for this to happen again in 1 year or 2 years, 5 years. The reason why I'm not, because I don't want this to happen again. Can you imagine the pain if it happens again in 2, 5, 10 years? We need to use this horrible, painful moment to have a cathartic resolution of the conflict. And so we need to remove extremists from power, not just from the Israeli-Palestinian areas, but also from the Islamic Republic regime in Iran, which is feeding, they funded Hamas to try to prevent this from the Israeli-Saudi realignment. You need to make sure that anybody that's acting as a spoiler and a divider, anybody has an absolutist conviction to defeat humanity, we need to remove them from power in the United States, everywhere. It's just, otherwise we're not going to be able to do it. Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
No, I mean, I guess what...
Thank you.
I guess I just wanted to, Erin, your perspective on like this time period, this 4 years. We have to keep our patience and our optimism up for a long time, to be able to get to this, like the work you guys do at World Central Kitchen, like it's never going to end, right? Because if it's not this disaster, it's the next one that you're in. Like, how do you keep doing on this work that's never ending? How do you stay optimistic? How do you keep your teams optimistic?
Look, we all have our hard days, right? I think just going back to the community, the beauty in which this universe, these communities are living, operating. I mean, in the darkest days, you see the brightest of humanity, right? You see the best of humanity come out.
That feeds you?
It is. Yes, it's like an adrenaline rush. Yes, who doesn't want to be around the best of humanity? And, World Central Kitchen exists because we're filling a gap, a niche that nobody else was operating in, right? There's FEMA, there's other organizations that are responding after disasters, but nobody with the tenacity, nobody with the speed in which we operate, right? There's, Jose always says, people aren't hungry in a week. If you're hungry now, right? And there's such a space for us and for others to show up when a disaster happens, whether it's, a neighbor's house catching on fire and burning down, or as large scale as Ukraine, or what our teams are actually responding to right now in Acapulco after Hurricane John, which is actually more devastating than Hurricane Otis, right? Our teams are still in Asheville, North Carolina, in Florida, responding to hurricanes. So I think it definitely requires a certain person. It's not for everybody. We know that. But there's a real need for what we do, and a hope. And again, this connection with people to
Daniel,
give that perspective.
You have one last comment?
On the point about optimism, because I know Jose Andres very well, and I think what fuels him or what fuels me, it's not necessarily optimism as much as determination. I always say that it's not whether the glass is half full or half empty, it's about filling up the glass. And Jose Andres, the way he thinks is like, let's solve it, let's do it, let's be a builder. He's a builder, and what we need is builders. For me, definitely what fuels me is purpose and the recognition, like Zeldin said, that we have to do this because there's no alternative. But it's not about optimism as much as about a conviction that it's upon us, that everyone has the power, and that with that power comes the responsibility for us to be part of the solutions and to be builders rather than destroyers.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being willing to engage in this difficult conversation, and actually, I know we're going to recognize the award winners later today, but while I have you up here, I feel like we have to give you your awards now. So let's do that.